not one of your good people, Rachel.
What do you mean?
All these years I wanted to kill him. Now I can't.
Your father would be ashamed of you.
Okay, so a while ago I made a video titled Why I Love Batman Begins. That video in particular was very opinion based and I didn't give the film full criticism with adding my personal opinions on the film as well. I eventually ended up deleting that entire video just because I had to redo the video about 3 times because of copyright issues and it was a bit rushed in some editing. Also, my commentary wasn't so great and also very rushed, but what made me want to come back to this particular topic is Nolan. I personally love the Christopher Nolan movies as they were my first introduction to Batman, and especially this movie. This movie, in my personal opinion, is better than The Dark Knight, and that's just because the mundane and the comic book aesthetic is done really well. It achieved a very realistic style of Batman while also making you feel as though you were experiencing comic book, which is something the other 2 movies in the trilogy did not have. With the new release of the Batman 2022 scheduled to come out in March of that year, it can most likely take some things that Batman Begins achieved. I also want to mainly discuss my passion for this film in a very different way, since many videos have been made on Batman Begins and why other people may love the film. I guess to me that just wasn't unique enough. If you do want a super detailed review on this film, specifically watch High Top Films Batman Begins video. Many people since the Batman 22 trailer have compared it to the Dark Knight trilogy already, despite it not even coming out yet, and more importantly, they compare it to the Dark Knight itself. First thing I want to say is that these films so far have a very different atmosphere and or vibe to them already. This new film seems to achieve comic book aesthetic with its realism, which is something Batman Begins had already achieved nearly 16 years ago. So for this video, I mainly want to go over on how this film achieved that. But one more thing before I continue. My upload schedule in fact is Monday every week depending on how early or late I get videos on to you guys. Also, either this video or the next video will be delayed due to me moving and most likely me being without Wi-Fi for a few days to even be able to write and create this video. Batman Begins is a comic book film that was supposed to reboot the entire franchise and achieve that and so much more. This film alone inspired films like Man of Steel, Superman Returns, and The Amazing Spider-Man, while also the general movie itself had a major influence on games such as the Arkham series trilogy. This film alone had introduced us to a different side of Bruce Wayne, which is something we never really had seen before on film. Tim Burton's masterful version of the Batman had little character development with the main character himself. In retrospect, he seemed a villain amongst other villains in Gotham City with no real background and purpose as to why he's doing what he's doing. Batman Begins was also the first movie to incorporate Batman's most defining rule of no killing in live action, aside from its TV counterpart, Batman the Animated Series. This film had also given us a good look at the real corruption that goes on in Gotham City. The story adaptation of the Caped Crusader had shown us some aspects taken from books like Batman Year One and Frank Miller's Batman Returns, while also managing to keep the Gotham environment as real and down to earth as possible. The mundane aspects did not seem so suffocating as they were in the Dark Knight film. The streets were very dirty and gothic in some areas of the film. The main city had very mundane skyscrapers and yet seemed to achieve that somewhat gothic tone. The Narrows were also very slum-filled as we saw laundry across the buildings as in any project type of area. Short alleyways, smoke rising from the sidewalks, and the rain made it all the better. Also, the incorporation of the mob hasn't been done in live action at this given time yet. So we were introduced to characters like Carmine Falcone and the entire crime family, and also Scarecrow's first appearance in live action. This film wasn't afraid of having some comic book elements in this movie, such as the fear toxin effects and the scene where Bruce Wayne comes down the well. Hell, even the scene where Batman escapes an entire SWAT team from the aid of bats which was already directly taken from the Batman Year One comic book. These aspects are needed in order to make a semi-realistic superhero story while not abandoning its comic book origin. Also, one thing that this film had achieved was the main fundamentals of being Batman. With Zack Snyder's Justice League coming out this week, we will see this version of Batman that doesn't have Batman's main fundamentals. I love Ben Affleck's version of Batman despite the hate it already gets just because of its dark, edgy murder tone it has. Too many people criticize this version of Batman because Zack Snyder threw away the fundamental character elements that make Batman what he is. Nolan had understood that main fundamental and made the psychology of Batman more real without abandoning his basis for being who he is. The universe's Batman would have worked more if he had a reason behind his actions, that his switch to murder and branding criminals was the loss of his Robin, or how the world around him is getting darker and more cruel. But no, they make none of this a narrative, but instead have him killed because that is how they want Batman. And listen, this would be a great Elseworld story if it weren't mainstream, but this is or was the mainstream Batman going on 5 years now until Matt Reeves The Batman comes to the big screens. The biggest thing with Batman Begins was the development of Bruce Wayne, because Bruce Wayne and Batman are very two different characters, and yet Bruce Wayne is the one who put on the mask and decided to become a vigilante. How did someone come from privilege and want to bring justice to a city that is crawling with corruption, and that is fear? Bruce Wayne needed to learn what it was like to be them. He needed to relate to them. How can he punish the guilty without understanding the guilty? What is it like to live on the streets of Gotham fighting for food? What is it like to find a place to live? Bruce Wayne believes it is not his place to be judge, jury, and executioner, because to be on the right side of the law, he has to be different. There are things that he has to be willing not to do in order to really save Gotham. He has to show Gotham he is different. Batman Arkham Origins had established this narrative within its noir-based detective story. Batman came to Gotham to show the people that they do not belong to the criminals and the corrupt, and that he is the only
thing between the innocent and the predatory. No, not may be. I am. When the mugger or the thief stops to think twice, that is fear. That is what I am. That is why they hired assassins, because I am the reason the criminals breathe easier when the sun rises. So no, Alfred, I am not in over my head. Tonight will be my end, but it will be theirs.
To make something real out of a comic book isn't easy to do, especially one with an exaggerated character as Batman. Years and years after many retellings of the Caped Crusader and his origin, and none of live action really have gotten his base from the comic books except Batman Begins. I appreciate Batman Begins so much because the movie alone tells you everything you need to know about Batman, and not just him, but Bruce Wayne. This was the very first live action adaptation that explained why Bruce Wayne donned the cape and cowl in the first place. Batman Begins had brought the idea of a man devoting his life to fighting criminals, and it was achieved through relatability. Us as the viewer may not have gone through the same thing Bruce Wayne has gone through. Honestly, is there not one person watching this video right now that does not want to make a change within the world? I read alerts of crime that goes on every day, horrific crimes around the globe, and I wish there were people like Batman and Superman out there to do something about it. Hell, I wish I were one of those characters, but I'm not, and to do something as extreme, we need to be able to see things in Bruce Wayne's eyes, and why he's doing what he's doing. I love Batman as a character, and I believe we gravitate to this character more because at the end of the day, he's just a man trying to do the right thing. He wasn't born on a distant planet or was struck by a wave of dark matter lightning, but he has the will to do what is right. We all want to be extraordinary, to do things that other people are not willing to do, to be different, to save lives, to punish the guilty, if that even means devoting your life to doing it. Bruce Wayne is angry and has been hurt his whole life. I can relate to that because I struggle with anger personally, and I struggle with feeling as though I don't matter and still wanting to be the good guy, still help those in need, to still do the right thing, and that separates the good people from the bad, the will to do the right thing even if it may feel wrong, the will to act. That entire trilogy is based around consequence. No matter how good or bad the decision Bruce has made, he still has to deal with the repercussions of those choices, and that is real. There is nothing you can do about what happens after the decisions you make. It matters which ones you make, and honestly, if they were the right ones, did you do the right thing? And that is what really matters. Did the choice you make mold you into a better person, or is the person you don't recognize? If you want to change, you cannot become something you hate. You cannot be a hypocrite, and that is what Bruce had learned in this movie. He learned how to be true to his real self and not to be a hypocrite, and most of all, to be his own man. Make his own decisions and have faith they were the right ones in the end. What is the Batman all about? He's about justice, doing the right thing at any cost. He's just a man, and so are we. Batman Begins had achieved a perfect blend of the comic book aesthetic and the mundane realism completely. With the new release of The Batman coming March of 2022, I hope we get to see those same fundamentals of the Batman return to live action, because that will just give me more hope, personally.